Welcome to the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm your host, Ben Anderson. It is December 16th. It is 1 p.m. We are recording this about an hour later than usual, but I'm rolling solo today. Appreciate everybody who tunes in and follows me on Twitter, Instagram, wherever you get your social media, Blue Sky, at Ben's Hoops, and of course reads me at kslsports.com. Just a quick programming note. This will be the last podcast of 2024. Taking a little bit of break to end the season around the holidays, and then getting you back up and going at the beginning of the new year. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks is the plan to be back and recording again. So appreciate everyone who's listened all year and has made this a regular listen for you. All right, we're going to do what we always do. We get to the mailbag. I sent out the prompt earlier today. If you see it, because you follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops, you can just respond there with your question about the Utah Jazz. We wrap up every podcast by addressing those questions. Otherwise, we're going to go through what's happened over the last week since we last recorded, some news and notes, and then we'll get to that mailbag. Light week for the Jazz. They only played one game. It is the middle of the NBA Cup still. In fact, tomorrow, Tuesday, or maybe you're listening to this on Tuesday, they are going to be wrapping up the NBA Cup. It's going to be the Thunder versus the Milwaukee Bucks, which actually is a pretty good matchup. There's a lot of star power there. And whoever wins this is probably going to feel pretty good about their ability to win in the playoffs. That doesn't mean you're going to win a title, but the Thunder certainly fancy themselves as contenders, and obviously the Bucks already have their title in the last few years, so they probably want to see if that window is still open, and maybe winning a game like this on the road would be a big sign for them that they still have it. They are certainly playing much better after their rocky start. But the Jazz lost to the Suns at home on Friday. Look, if you're a Jazz fan and you're on board for the, capture the flag, tank for Cooper flag, or Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper, or whoever you want, this is kind of a perfect basketball game. The Jazz youngsters, I thought, showed really well. Keyonte George is playing probably the best basketball of his career recently, and they still found a way to lose a game. And it was really entertaining, and it's, at the time, tied a record for most threes ever made in the NBA. That was broken Sunday night by the Warriors and the Dallas Mavericks. They hit 48, but the Jazz and Suns had combined to hit 44, 22 apiece. That was a fun game to watch. You had, windmill dunks from John Collins and big block shots from Keyonte George and nice shooting nights. And Walker Kessler did something I've kind of tweeted about him doing, which is it seems like every 2 or 3 games now, he's showing you something new. And this was, hitting back-to-back corner threes to open the game, which I'm not expecting a lot of. Maybe you'll see one tonight against the Clippers, but I just don't think that's what the Jazz are going to fully lean into Walker doing. I don't think you want to take him too far away from his strength, but when you had that long week of practice like they've had, you can drop a couple of plays like that to set him up, and he can practice and be ready to knock him down. And he did that, and maybe a sense of the future, maybe he gets there, but regardless, that's what he was able to do. He's just been incredibly fun to watch as well. So, a good game. You were entertained if you went, probably entertained if you watched on TV, and then you still sit at 5 wins in the standings, which is third worst and continues to get you close to that top lottery pick, where all of these players, especially Cooper Flag and Dylan Harper, look very, very special. Ace Bailey has some non-passing stuff that is concerning that I've seen early, but man, he can make some shots. So worth keeping an eye on the standings. Again, we'll talk about that more coming up in just a moment. The Jazz do get back in more regular action coming up over the next 3 days, or next 3 games, I should say, this week. They're going to take on the Clippers tonight, late 8:30 game. So hope you can stay up and watch that. Then 2 big games for those rankings towards the end of the season are going to look back on at Detroit on Thursday night and at Brooklyn on Saturday night. Both of those teams have 10 wins. They have twice as many wins as the Jazz do entering this week. I had talked a lot about how I thought Detroit was going to be better than the Jazz. If you've listened to the podcast consistently, I didn't really see a pathway where they weren't, barring injuries, and look, that could still happen. But Cade has been healthy. And they've got a bunch of NBA veterans. They went out and signed Tobias Harris and former Jazzman Malik Beasley, and they just waived Paul Reed, but he was on the roster. And they've got some good young players who are all probably a year or 2 ahead of the Jazz in their development. It made sense that they were going to be better than the Jazz to me, and they are. Plus, you've got J.B. Bickerstaff in his first year who's trying to win games. Brooklyn has certainly been one of the surprises with their 10 wins. Jordi Fernandez, though, their head coach, seems promising. And much like Will Hardy, his first year with the Jazz, those coaches aren't comfortable enough with their job security to not do a good job. They're going to come in and they want to prove that they're worth coming back the second year or the third year, because coaches get fired quickly and they want to win to show that they belong. And then you get a little momentum, and it's hard to say, like, oh, guys, ease up, slow down a little bit. We're winning too many games. And that's why Brooklyn is sitting at 10-15 on the season, when I think a lot of people thought they'd be closer to 10 wins to end the year, certainly than they'd be at before Christmas. They have already started to deconstruct their roster. They traded Dennis Schroeder to the Golden State Warriors for DeAnthony Melton, who's hurt and is not going to play. And they got some second-round picks out of it. So that will make the Warriors better. That will certainly make the Nets worse. And then you're going to see some teams, I think, starting to be a little bit more aggressive with those trades, even in mid-December, as crazy as that sounds to be this early. I think teams are already looking at, hey, are we too far ahead in the standings? You know, they've got twice as many wins as the Jazz. They've got, it seems like 5 times as many wins as the Wizards, and twice as many wins as the Pelicans as well. So you got to be careful winning too many games if your goal is to get a guy who's going to change your franchise at the top of this draft. Because if you end up 5 or 6 or 6 or 7, like we've seen with the Jazz, you can drop as far as 9. You can drop down to 10. You know, Jazz were supposed to be at 8 last year and dropped to 10, and that can be very impactful. So big games for the Jazz end of season standings coming up on Thursday and Saturday. Quick news and notes. The Jazz did recall Cody Williams. We'll talk about that more. I saw we have a question about him in the mailbag. He did just play with the G League for several games, some ups and downs, and we can break that down coming up when we get to the mailbag question. That's kind of the major piece. And look, again, if you're trying to figure out, are the Jazz going to win too many games? Are they going to be too competitive? Play Cody Williams. That's not a knock on Cody Williams. That's about young players. Young players do not necessarily play that well. They don't help you win games, and Cody is raw. And I'm sure they want to see how much progress he's actually made in the G League, because he had some bright moments. He had some low spots, as I mentioned. What did he actually learn? And can you see it on the floor? I would remind you that Ochai Abaji's G League stats were underwhelming, as were Johnny Juzang's. And then they come up to the NBA, and all of a sudden they've just got a little bit more confidence, and they play a little bit differently. They understand what works and what doesn't work, and they start to fit into the NBA better. So it's more than just about numbers, and I'll give you some information on that coming up here in just a moment. Quickly, I know I mentioned it already with the standings, with the games this weekend. The Jazz sit at 5-19. They are third worst in the league. They're second worst in the West, behind the New Orleans Pelicans, who are 5-22, also looking to blow it up. I'm not sure we're going to see Zion again in a New Orleans Pelicans uniform if they can trade him. The nice thing is his contract is totally non-guaranteed after this season, so that makes him a little more easy to trade. I'm sure the Pelicans are still going to ask a lot for him, and I doubt anyone around the NBA is going to offer a ton because he's a former number 1 overall pick who's good enough at his best to be a franchise piece and is never on the floor, and that's a major problem. So Jazz in a good spot. 5 wins. Again, a lot of these other teams just continue to rack up weird, odd wins here and there, and it makes it hard at the end of the season to make up 5 wins. You can make up losses. You can control all your losses in the second half of the season. It's hard to say, ooh, I hope this team accidentally wins 3 games in April. They're not going to do that because they know it doesn't behoove them to do it. So you actually want to lose those games in Detroit. Or, you want to lose those games in December in Detroit. And that's how you make sure that you end up with, 22 wins at the end of the season. And you're not saying, ooh, well, maybe the very last game of the season, the Clippers are going to be resting to get in the playoffs, and that's who the Pelicans are playing, and you hope the Pelicans accidentally win that game, and they move to 5th in the standings, and then the Jazz are at 4th, or whoever team you're rooting for is in 4th, and then Tankathon says that gives you a 10% better shot of, getting number 2 overall, whatever. That's what you have to avoid. So I think you're going to see some of those teams start to do that. But again, Portland's already sitting at 8 wins. They've got the third fewest in the NBA and still 3 more than the Jazz. Toronto, Charlotte, Philly, all at 7 wins as well. So they've got 2 more than the Jazz. Philly's trying to win. They just can't stay healthy. Charlotte, they're a mess. They're all over the place, 1-9 in their last 10. They're going to start trying to lose, and I'll see if they trade any players. I'm not sure who they have to trade. And then Toronto was so unhealthy to start the year. Figured it out, got a little healthy, and then Scotty Barnes really hurt his ankle again. So he's going to be out for a while. So they're going to be in contention for some of these lower-level picks. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will get to the mailbag. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. All right, welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson. As always, find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops. If you want to interact with the podcast, that's the best way to do it. And you can respond to my prompt. I posted both places, and if you want to ask a question that gets answered on the episode, I love to do it. It makes my life easier, and I hope I can give you some information you're looking for. We'll start with Jake the Lynx, a loyal listener on Blue Sky, then we'll get to the Twitter questions. He says, we know the list of players on the team that the Jazz might be willing to trade. I'm assuming you're talking about the veterans. But what are they looking for back? Who's the realistic trade partner? Doesn't seem like the Jazz really need to offload veterans for help tanking. They're bad enough and have lots of picks and young players already. I think that's correct. The Jazz don't necessarily need to get rid of John Collins. They have 5 wins with John Collins. they don't need to get rid of Colin Sexton. They have 5 wins with Colin Sexton. And so maybe you think, hey, either wait for bigger trades, which usually happen in the offseason, because in July, I was just talking to an NBA coach about this. Not everyone's trying to get better. There's like 5 or 6 teams in the NBA in February that are trying to make moves and get better. It's not 30 teams. Just because there's 30 teams out there, as we just talked about in the last segment, not everyone's trying to improve. Some teams are trying to get worse, and that makes it hard to trade your good players to teams trying to get worse. But in the offseason, basically everyone's trying to get better. They're trying to see if there's a deal out there. You know, the Jazz went into a year knowing that they were not going to be competing for the playoffs, and they traded for John Collins because they said, yeah, it might make you a little bit better, a little more talent, but like you're acquiring a piece that you can use later for either winning or trading. So there's more deals to be made in the offseason. So I think you're right, Jake. The Jazz don't have to make a trade, and they can still lose enough games. I think that's a positive. But what are they looking for? Well, they'll always take draft picks, and I know the report was the Jazz want young players. It's like, well, sure, it'd be great to find the next Dyson Daniels. You know, Dyson Daniels is coming back in exchange for DeJounte Murray in Atlanta, and has just been awesome. He's been a great player, and he's been a piece. And I'm sure the Jazz would say, well, how do we find our guy who has maybe fallen out of favor in his spot but might be useful in the next location? And then you got to look at teams that are good, that have young players that are not in the rotation, that might be able to step in with a new change of pace, be able to offer a little bit more than they did, or than they were able to when they were in their more veteran, more talented teams. You know, Trey Mann got traded to Charlotte for Gordon Hayward and is a much better player than Gordon Hayward. That was a bad trade by the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they wanted a vet to see if that would work, and it didn't do anything for them. So, yeah, you got to keep an eye on players like that. I went back through a couple of drafts just to find out where these guys might be. 2 names stick out. I think the most notable one, and we'll see, I know there was talk about Golden State continuing to expand their trade with the Brooklyn Nets. Moses Moody is a name I'd really look at. And I'm not saying I've heard anything about the Jazz, but like if you're looking for a young player who has just simply not clicked in his location, but is a former lottery pick, has great NBA size at 6'5", 205 pounds, does a lot of NBA things, 45% from the floor, 36% from 3, but might just be a weird fit in a Golden State team that's pretty specific, that has pretty specific needs. He's only played 23 games this year. He's made 4 starts. He's averaging 15 minutes. Again, we're always kind of like waiting for this Moses Moody breakout, and it never happens. So how do you get something out of him, or how do you get him back? And can you take back a bad Warriors contract, give them a good player, and get Moses Moody and maybe a future second-round pick if they even have any left after the Schroeder trade? So, or a first, you know what I mean? That's kind of, I think, what you're looking at. That's one name that jumped out. You can probably get Marjon Beauchamp from the Milwaukee Bucks for nothing. They didn't even extend him a qualifying offer after this year, so he's an unrestricted free agent. So you would be stupid to pay anything significant for him. You just hope, hey, we'll take him off your hands. Here's a second-round pick swap or something goofy like that. Now, the Jazz don't want to do that because the Jazz's second-round picks right now are looking like they're going to be in the 30s. Not that they even have one this year. But, these second-round picks that they're going to have coming up, you don't want to accidentally give up the 32nd overall pick for the 60th pick and a guy in Beauchamp who you could get after the season. But those are the types of names just on good teams that aren't playing that I came up with quickly that aren't, outside of their rookie contract. It is hard to find guys. It's hard to find these players who check those boxes and can fit somewhere that aren't, completely flawed or just absolute non-NBA players. Like you might say, James Bouknight was drafted in the lottery right around where Moses Moody was. In fact, ahead of Moses Moody. So was Josh Primo. Well, Josh Primo is creeped his way out of the league, and Bouknight was impossible to get along with, apparently, and couldn't even make it in Charlotte. No one wanted to play with him. So he's out. Throw him out. That's where it gets difficult for the Jazz. And the interesting thing for the Jazz is they do have all these contracts that they can mix and match and basically build any price tag they want. They could get up to $40 million relatively easily. They could get to $10 million easily. They can have $5 million easily. Like they've got options to get players. If someone just wanted to dump salary to get under a luxury tax or a tax apron and said, well, we'll take Svi Mikhailiuk and a future second-round pick, and the Jazz say, fine, give us your $5 million young player. We'll cut $2 million off your salary bill, which ends up being far better because it has the repeater tax and the tax apron issues. There's value there. So it's hard to pick players, again, like I mentioned, but just ideas of what's out there and what's possible, and certainly what I would imagine the Jazz are looking for, because draft picks are fine. You're already starting to see, though, these kind of fewer crazy draft pick trades, and the draft picks are almost losing value. Mikal Bridges cost 6 draft picks. When the Jazz got all these picks, I remember specifically Justin Zanuck saying, we think we have enough draft capital to not just make 1 superstar trade, but 2. And now it's well, do you? Because if Mikal Bridges isn't a superstar and he costs 6, do you even have enough to get 1? What's it going to cost to get Giannis Antetokounmpo if he ever asked out? It's going to be everything. You're going to need a superstar young player and all the draft picks, and the Jazz don't have the superstar young player yet. So, what's it going to be? The Jazz are going to have to listen to offers this offseason, just because you have to, of 6 draft picks for Lauri Markkanen. And you probably have to very seriously consider that, because it's such a huge draft haul, but that's the price tag after what Mikal Bridges went for, and Lowry's better than Mikal Bridges. So is it 7 draft picks, or is it better young players? That's kind of the interesting model we found ourselves in now with draft picks and what the Jazz are doing. So that might be why you've seen reports recently that they are more interested in getting young players than just necessarily draft picks. All right, next question on Blue Sky comes from Cardio Nurse. It says, how much do you think the players in private talk about being on a clearly tanking team? What's the vibe? The locker room is good. It seems fine. Everyone seems happy. I mean, the thing that's interesting about the Jazz is, and weirdly, the exception of the guy who's not playing great compared to his standards is Lowry. Lowry's kind of having a down year compared to what he has generally been over the last 2 seasons with the Jazz. And look, he's still the Jazz's best player. He's the most dangerous player. He's just having a lot of games where he's taking 9 shots. He's kind of having some of these weird games where we're just not seeing him play a whole lot. And I don't think that's going to hurt his value in the slightest if you're worried about that as a Jazz fan. But, John Collins is playing out of his mind right now. Walker Kessler's having the best season of his career. Colin Sexton is Colin Sexton. Colin Sexton is such a unique person, and in a good way, that I just don't think he's focused like that. And that doesn't mean he's disengaged, but I think Colin Sexton's having a fine year. We mentioned Keontae's playing well and is happy. I think the young guys are happy to be getting a chance in the NBA and not sitting in the G League as much. So it's a young roster, and I think being young just naturally kind of provides some energy for you that people like to be around. So the only guy, I'd say is having a down year is Lowry. He's playing 2 minutes fewer. His numbers have dropped quite a bit. He went from 23 points down to 18 points, from 8 rebounds down to 6 rebounds. His 3-point shooting's down from 8 attempts at 39% to just under 7 attempts at 38%. So his field goal percentage is down from 48% down to 44%. So there's some down numbers for him, for sure. And Lowry is such a well-adjusted person that I certainly don't get the impression he's panicking. I mean, he is extraordinarily friendly with all of the media in the locker room and continues to be that way. So we will see. And then, I don't know if Lowry knows what his future is in Utah. I'm sure he recognizes that he was in very serious trade talks this offseason. He got his money, and maybe that's the last interaction he has with the Jazz. Not meaning he's not talking. He likes Will Hardy. Will Hardy likes him. Everyone likes each other. But maybe he gets shopped this offseason, and he recognizes the business aspect of it. And he got his $200 million. He's not been hurt by anybody. He's doing very well. So to answer your question, I don't think anyone is under the misunderstanding that that's not what's going on, that this isn't a very bad basketball team and their record's actually worse than they are talent-wise. But it's not like there's this real depression or this dark cloud hanging over the locker room in the slightest. The young guys are happy to be playing well or playing at all. The veterans are pretty happy to be playing well, and the losses just aren't coming, or the wins just aren't coming. So I don't think there's a lot of panic to be had there. All right, let's switch over to Twitter at Ben's Hoops as always. Derek says, thinking of Jeremy Evans with this question, what Jazz players have other skills, hobbies that many Jazz fans aren't aware of that may be surprising or unexpected? Jeremy Evans notoriously was a painter, and that was kind of his big thing. Speaking of Lowry's like a much bigger video game person than you would think. He sold me on the idea of a PlayStation VR headset and the racing game Gran Turismo. He made it sound like he had this $80,000 setup, and he was like, "No, it's just a little steering wheel, which I don't have a steering wheel or anything like that. It's I'm sure it's a couple $100, but it's his whole thing is $300 or $400. Lowry's just a through and through jock. He's just a huge sports fan, so it's no surprise that he's way into F1 racing, and that's kind of his life. But yeah, he's just kind of a goofy dad and plays his video games and has that. Keontae George has his dog. A lot of these young guys, you got to realize they're just like, they're not that mature yet where they've been like, how do I add things to my life? Like their life is just basketball. So many of these guys are just, they live at the gym. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's like they don't have a lot. They've never done anything else in their life. Their whole life has been AAU or college basketball. Jeremy Evans, one of the reasons he had hobbies is because no one expected him to make the NBA. Like there's a famous story of the Jazz going to check out a player at Western Kentucky, not named Jeremy Evans. I think that's where he went. And they said, oh, yeah, we saw a guy we liked. And everyone assumed they were talking about his teammate. And they're like, no, we like Jeremy Evans. We're going to draft Jeremy Evans. And they did. Like, he was so off the radar, they didn't think he was an NBA player. And they saw him. And when they drafted him on draft night, notoriously, everybody was like, who? Him? He's not even the best player on his team. And I don't think the other guy did anything either. So I think that is part of it. A lot of these guys just don't have crazy, crazy hobbies. Jordan Clarkson has picked up golf recently. I know that's been a big addition in his life that he's done. But yeah, I think a lot of these guys, they're private and either haven't shared it or they're just, they're just basketball junkies and they're trying to get into that mood and make sure that they're improving in that regard. But good question. I've thought about that as well, and I realize I don't know a ton about it. Bryce Sensabaugh used to skateboard. Well, you can't skateboard when you're in the NBA. you can't hurt yourself. So a lot of those guys ditch any of those hobbies. And that's the other thing. A lot of them was like, yeah, Keontae played football, I bet. Okay, well, you can't play football now that you're in the NBA. Cam Young. Assuming we don't take a point guard at the top of the draft, do we need to acquire a true set-the-table type point guard next year to put all the young players in the best position to thrive with a stable offensive structure? I think you could do that with the backup, if I'm being honest with you. I've told you I've been very kind of up and down on the idea of Keontae George as the Jazz's point guard. Is he good enough to do it or not? Last 2 weeks, I feel like he's looked like he's good enough to do it. Before that, I felt like there's times when he doesn't look like he's good enough to do it. So I think that remains a question. The hard part is if he's not good enough to do it, he's too small to be your shooting guard. So that's always your battle that you've got to figure out with the Jazz and with Keontae George. So, do I think that like adding a point guard's a priority? It's probably not. And in fact, like it's going to be really interesting. Dylan Harper is probably the best player in college basketball right now. Like truly, not just best freshman, he might be the best player in college basketball. Do you take him or his teammate Ace Bailey? Ace Bailey is 4 inches taller, 5 inches taller, and makes shots. It's like, it's what the NBA is about, is these physical, genetic freaks that game is on the line. I'm just bigger than you. Like, guys, Kyrie is probably more skilled than Luka Doncic. Luka is 6'8", Kyrie is 6'2". At the end of the game, who can get the shot off of over Rudy Gobert in a playoff game on the road? And it's Luka. And Kyrie's probably quicker. Kyrie might be a better shooter. In fact, I know Kyrie's a better shooter. But Luka's getting the ball because genetically he's better. So there's still that issue. And, would you draft a Dylan Harper over some of these bigger guys? I don't know. I think that question will be asked. And maybe he's just so good by the end of the year, it erases the doubt. But, like, look, the last time we had a point guard that was can't miss, that was coming to the draft, it was Scoot Henderson. And he's been nothing but a miss. And I was wrong. I was thinking, wow, man, I might take Scoot over Brandon Miller. I get Brandon Miller, but Scoot just did all these things in the G League, and he's so young, and he's doing it against these grown men. It's like, no, Brandon Miller's 6'9". He's an awesome athlete. He can shoot over everybody. Scoot isn't a great shooter, and it's hard for him to get shots off at the next level because he's so little. It's like, okay, that's a major problem. So I always would default to size. And then positional size does matter. That's where BYU's Yegor Demine comes in and is very interesting because he's a point guard and he's 6'8", and he looks like he's 6'8" and he looks like a point guard. So all of a sudden it's a little bit, I'm not going to compare him to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but the advantage of having a guy like Shai at that height who is so skilled but is also that big, can get shots off whenever he wants. That's why Lonzo Ball's good. Lonzo Ball's really talented. He's a huge person. He's 6'8". He's a huge person. Who can do some of those point guard things, and that makes, even some of his nonsensical stuff, his circus stuff, he can still get away with it. So that's what I would keep an eye on, Cam. Maybe more so than necessarily, like, do they need a quote-unquote true point guard? Get a good backup who's very reliable, whatever size, not going to turn the ball over, Monty Morris or whatever, and then deal with trying to get as big of players as you can in the starting lineup. Scott Johnson says, assuming the Jazz eventually win a championship, based on the results of their current rebuild, will any other team have endured more losing seasons, assume 4, but may need to be 5, in the process of a rebuild that resulted in its first championship? Comps, I mean, the Cleveland Cavaliers sucked for 30 years before LeBron won them a title. And now, again, they were in the finals, and he left, and they were down for 4 years, rebuilding, got Kyrie, got Andrew Wiggins, traded Wiggins for Kevin Love, and then LeBron comes back, and they win a title. So that was 4 years, if I remember my math correctly, because LeBron bookended his Miami stay with losses and won 2 in the middle, 2 titles there. So 4 there. The Dallas Mavericks were bad for a long time, but they had rebuilt and were consistently good by the time Dirk won them a title. He'd been there for a long time before it happened, so I don't think that counts necessarily as a rebuild. No, it's one of the issues with rebuilding the way the Jazz are is there's actually not a lot of proven cases of it working. San Antonio didn't do it. San Antonio's kind of done it now for Victor Wembanyama. Are they going to win a title again? Odds are no, but Victor's probably going to be good enough to get you there. Minnesota's tried to rebuild this way forever. Hasn't worked. The Clippers, did the tanking thing for Blake Griffin, or were just bad and got Blake Griffin. They may have even won the lottery to move up that year, if I remember correctly. And that might have even been in a trade now. So that didn't work. They were good, but they didn't get a title out of it. So it's hard to win a title by rebuilding. It's hard to win a title, period, unless you get a generational player. That's just kind of the ultimate way. And more than like, hey, it takes 4 years of draft picks to get the right guys. It's like, no, you just got to get the one right guy and then have everything else fall in place around him. And even that, like the 76ers did it. They tanked forever. Joel's good enough. Joel's, a legit superstar MVP level player, and they've even had the pieces around him. They had Jimmy Butler. They've drafted really well. They've brought in guys like Tyrese Maxey, who's awesome. And I don't know if they're going to win a title with him. In fact, I think they're probably not. And then Denver doesn't tank, gets Nikola Jokic in the second round, and wins a title. So it's just about funding that guy. However you have to get him, and teams just think, well, the draft is probably the easiest way to get him, and I think they're actually right. So yeah, I don't know if there's a comp, but maybe you would say Cleveland, after they lost LeBron, they kind of lost everything, had 2 number 1 overall picks within those 4-year windows, and came back strong. James McKinney, do you think Zion Williamson and Lauri Markkanen would make some sense together on a team? I do. Zion's really interesting. Zion is a name that if you wanted to take a high upside swing for the Jazz is a name to keep an eye on, because I think the Pelicans are done with him. I wouldn't give up a single draft pick for him. I would just give up salary matching and say, hey, man, if you guys really like John Collins and Drew Eubanks, like that might get the deal done. That might be enough to get the deal done right there. As far as salary, not that's enough pieces, but like I think the Pelicans are going to want more because, again, they see him as like, this is a franchise piece. And everyone says that's the most damaged player in the NBA who can barely stay on the floor. He's on the floor so rarely that his contract is void. Essentially, he has not played enough games for his contract to be guaranteed beyond this season. So that's why you would trade for him, is he's on a totally non-guaranteed deal, and would actually make some sense for the Jazz because you could bring Zion in, test him out, may not even put him on the floor, but just test him out, let him get fully healthy, see if he can focus on basketball being in the state of Utah as opposed to being in New Orleans. See if he likes your coaching staff. See if your coaching staff and GM and doctors trust what they're seeing from him. They're like, hey, that is a number 1 overall pick talent that's on your team that you got for nothing because he was such damaged goods that you got him for a song, which is exactly how the Mavericks got Kyrie Irving. So this does happen. And maybe you would take a flyer on it and then say, yeah, he's never played with a player like Lowry who just is the best space creator in the NBA, not name, Steph Curry. Like Lowry's 7 feet tall, so you have to guard him with a big, so you can't just constantly throw 2 bigs at Zion when he's in the paint. And then he opens up things for Zion to just wreck shop and be a bull in a china shop. I think there actually is some value there. Can he play next to Walker? Does Walker have to hit more threes if you're going to do something like that? Maybe. Very possibly that's the case. And then, is he in this trade package that has hypothetical veteran pieces for Zion? A, worth it for the Jazz because, again, John Collins is playing so well, or B, enough for the Pelicans, and it just might not be. And the Jazz may prefer to have that money going into the offseason as opposed to trying to get Zion mid-year, which is totally understandable. The Postman says, is Colin Sexton contract eligible for negotiation and to extend like Lowry and Clarkson? Yeah, he should be. It'll be 3 years since he signed his contract, so he can sign an extension. He has 1 year left before he hits free agency, and that's talking about this summer. He'll have 1 year left before he hits unrestricted free agency. So yeah, he's eligible for a contract extension, and the Jazz could give him whatever they wanted or trade him as an expiring piece or whatever. But 3 years out, I think you can sign your deal, so I don't know why he wouldn't be unless I've missed something in ability to do it. But no, he signed his contract with the Jazz in 2022 in that sign and trade. It's the exact same reason why Lowry had to wait until I think it was August 6th this offseason, right, to sign his deal, because he'd been traded by the Bulls to the Cavs when he signed his contract and needed to wait 3 years before he could negotiate. So if the math applies, I think it should be the same. He should be extension eligible this offseason. All right, last question here. Sorry, I know this has gone a little bit long. I appreciate everyone sticking with us. Jazz Nation News says Jazz fans seem to be freaking out over Cody Williams' not so great stats in the G League. Do you have any concerns with his play with the Stars, or is it still too early for concerns with Cody Williams? Let's look up Cody Williams' G League stats right now, just to give fans an idea of what you're talking about. Because, yeah, they have not been fabulous. He's really struggled to shoot the ball at times. He's had some early games where he shot a lot and scored a lot, and then he had some games recently where he's still back down to 2 or 3 points. So he's played in 7 games. He's averaging 29 minutes a game. He's averaging 13 points a game, 4.4 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1.1 steals. He's shooting 30% from the floor and 21% from the three-point line. 68% from the free throw line. So the shots are still not falling at all, which was a similar issue that he had with the Jazz, where his shooting numbers were pretty abysmal, and he has struggled to do that. Is it a concern? I'm going to read you a quote from Will Hardy, because Will Hardy talked about this the other day. He was at the game when I think Isaiah went down and scored 36. I think he was at Isaiah's first game. I'm pretty sure it was. And then Will goes to the games. When he has a chance to go watch them play at the Maverick Center, he goes. This is what Will said about seeing Cody in the G League. He says, I think Cody's getting better. The game that I was at, I thought he played a good game. I just didn't think he shot the ball great. So I left encouraged. The making and the missing of shots is not everything for these guys, where they are in their careers. And so we try to stay focused on that while also recognizing that they're human and that they want to make every shot. And if they don't, they feel bad about themselves. So we have to help them keep that perspective. Essentially, don't worry about the shooting numbers for any of these guys this early in their career. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. Like Isaiah Collier couldn't shoot in college, has not been able to shoot in the NBA. If he can't shoot, he's not an NBA player. It's that simple. Even for all the other things he does well. Gets downhill, makes great decisions when he gets downhill, plays with a ton of tenacity, fun on defense. You still got to be able to shoot. It's why you got to give Colin Sexton so much credit. There's a world where he is Isaiah Collier and never learns to shoot. And he's like, no, man, I better turn into a 40% three-point shooter, and he has. Colin is awesome for that reason. And you hope that Isaiah Collier gets there. Isaiah did go down and shot 5 of 6 from 3 in his first game. So if you want to nitpick with Cody, I certainly think you can. There's just so much more to it. And, Cody's got to get so big, so much bigger. I said this early in the year on Twitter, I just don't know if I'm going to judge anything about Cody until he's strong enough to be in the NBA. Because at some point, it's just if you're not physically capable of competing because of the size of your frame at this point, and not your height, but I just mean the thinness of your chest, the lack of weight you have on your body because you're 6'9", but you weigh 160 pounds or whatever it is that Cody weighs. It's just you might as well be a high school freshman out there. Even if you're tall and lanky and have some of those other things and had skills in college, if you're not physically able to be out there, you might as well not be out there. It doesn't even matter. So I'm not going to judge him too harshly until he puts weight on his body. And even in the G League, he's playing against bigger, stronger guys than him every night. And I think that was difficult for him as well. And his numbers did go up, to his credit. He did score more. He did rebound more. He got more steals. He got more assists. Some of those things did improve for him. And I'm still not going to judge a whole lot on what he does until he adds strength. And if he doesn't add strength, again, he's not an NBA player. And the Jazz are betting that looking at his family history, looking at his type of frame, they've developed guys before, he will get bigger. And I will tell you, I saw Johnny Juzang after his, or going into his rookie season, and he'd played a lot more college basketball than Cody did. Looking at Johnny Juzang as a rookie to Johnny Juzang now, who I see in the locker room every day, Juzang's huge. He's barrel-chested. He's ripped. These guys get big. Rudy Gobert came into the NBA and had this awkward alien body. And by the time he left, he was an Adonis. He was so huge. His chest was so huge. It's yeah, I get why Rudy's awesome. His chest is the size of a Mack truck. His arms are huge now. And he's so long, it's almost hidden, but it works. You got to turn into a man. Cody's not a man. And he will get there. So no Jazz Nation news. I'm not worried about it. I can tell you the Jazz aren't necessarily worried about it. Do they wish he was, his brother in his rookie season? Yeah. Now, his brother also played a couple years, maybe 3 years at the same Mariners. I can't remember, but played a few years. I mean, he is older than Cody is. So when he came into the league and had developed quite a bit more. So I wouldn't worry about it that much. Do you wish Cody was shooting better? Great. Yeah, probably make Cody happier. Probably make him more confident. And he was further ahead of his process to grow. You would like that. It's just not always the case. And no, I wouldn't hit the panic button. All right, that'll do it. Appreciate everyone listening to a longer solo podcast. Again, programming note, taking the next 2 weeks off, but we'll be back with you again, I believe, on the 1st. So maybe it's just one podcast. No, actually, it'll probably be longer than that because that 2 weeks from now is the day before New Year's Eve. So I think we're going to be out a little bit more longer than that. We'll see. We will keep you in touch and just look for the prompt on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. And at Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops, and read us at always at KSLSports.com. Have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and be safe. We'll talk to you again soon.